Welcome, everybody. My name is Mina Jane, and I'm the director of the Ashland Public Library in Massachusetts. And I'm so incredibly excited to be here with, as they are affectionately called, Professors Cobb and Robb from Suffolk University Poli-Sci Department as we talk about elections in real time. And they are in their classroom and ready to talk to students about voter mobilization strategies. I will let them tell you all about it, but I just wanted to say a quick thank you to the Ashland Friends of the Ashland Public Library for supporting our programs, and to Professors Rosenthal and Cobb for letting us share this program with other libraries, because I think, and I hope your students can hear this, that when libraries work together, we can make magic. So welcome, Professor Cobb, Professor Rosenthal. Thank you so much for being here. I'm going to turn my screen off and leave it up to you, and I cannot wait to see what happens today.
Well, thank you very much. I just want to make sure that everybody can hear me. I am Rachael Cobb, and I'm delighted to welcome the listening audience out in Zoom land, library land, and also our students here today in our class. This is a class that I am so lucky to co-teach with Dr. Bob Rosenthal. We taught it before in 2016. And the goal of the class was to take our two disciplines, communications, advertising, public relations, and political science, and put them together into a classroom that tracks the presidential election and talks about all of the kinds of issues that happen around elections, and be together as we sort of walk through current events and try to understand them from both a citizen understanding as well as a disciplinary understanding. So today we are going to talk about voter mobilization techniques, and we are inviting the world of Zoom into our class. I'm going to talk, Bob is going to talk for a little bit, and then we're going to invite questions. And just for the students to know, for those of you who signed your release forms, I'm going to ask you to rather than trying to maneuver the camera and have it go to the class and make sure that we don't have anybody that doesn't need to be on camera. We're just going to invite those people to come up. And if you could introduce yourself and ask a question, and we'll walk you through it as the time comes. So today's reading for our class were excerpts from this book called Get Out the Vote, which is by Donald Green and Alan Gerber, who are two professors of political science at Yale. And they wrote this a long time ago. It's now in their 5th edition. And as they point out in their preface, there is a lot that has happened in elections since the late 90s. But there is also a lot that has just enabled us to study whether the techniques and things that they learned in 1998 hold to today. And so the book discusses a series of experiments that they run on all kinds of issues. So today we're going to walk through some of those things broadly. I'm going to begin, though, by talking about the fact that the United States has a lot of elections a lot of the time, and there are a lot of different types. So if there is one thing to know about the United States, we have more elections than any other country on earth, and we have them a lot of the time. Almost every month in the United States, somewhere, somehow, there is an election happening, which means that there's a lot of information that people have to take in about all of these elections. And so I just want to talk about the different types. There are the big ones that all of us know about, most of us know about. There are the big ones that are the presidency, Senate, governor. These are usually very high profile elections. They have a lot of money, and they are able to use that money to hire professionalized campaign staff, media consultants, pollsters, speechwriters, event coordinators. And they usually rely on mass communication as their primary method of connecting with people, because it's really hard to run a national campaign in a country as big as ours. And even in states, it's really hard because we have very big states and we have to reach a lot of people. So that means that you have to find the communication technique that is the most appropriate for those settings. But then there are the majority of elections in the United States, and these are the small ones. And they are school council, state legislature, school committee. They are low profile, low salience, and it's often very hard to get information about them because we've also lost a lot of local journalism in the United States. And that means that getting information has become more difficult, ironically, at a time when we have so much information available to us. We also have less information that is essentially reliable for people, especially about their local elected officials. And the characteristics of small elections are that they are low on money, low on salience, and so their task, if you are running for office at this most local level, your primary task is to just go out and find the people who will vote for you so you can try to win. And that is easier said than done. But the main takeaway here is we are trying to think, okay, if I'm running a small election in a small town, what do I want to know so that I can run this election effectively and try to win? So just as a snapshot about turnout in the United States, in the big elections, in the presidential elections, roughly speaking, we have about 60% of eligible electorate votes in US presidential elections. But as we've discussed before in class, there are big variations across age, across income, across education, across race, across ethnicity. In our federal midterm elections, we usually have 50% of the eligible electorate, give or take, usually a little bit less. And then finally, in our municipal elections and in those small elections of which I spoke, we have usually well under 30%. Sometimes it's as low as 10%, sometimes as low as 5%. It really depends on the election. And many of those elections are uncontested. Okay, so one of the things we know about voting in the United States is it costs. It costs us something to vote. It costs us, we have to register to vote. We might want to vote absentee, so we have to figure that out. We have to figure out what our polling place is, where it is. We have to figure out what the hours are. We have to figure out how we get to the polls, and we have to figure out what kind of identification we need in order to vote. So when we think about it, to just put this into perspective, the costs of voting mean that for all of us, one of the biggies is time. We have to spend time researching the candidates and the issues, getting to the polling place, waiting in line. So our time is taken up by it. Our money, some of it costs. We may have to get to the polling location, which might require a car or a bus or some sort of transportation. If we think it's going to take us a while, we might need to get childcare. We might need to take time off of work. So in some way, we are financially, it is costing us something. And the voter registration process itself might cost us something. It also costs us something in terms of our opportunity cost, which for those of you who have taken economics, you know what that means. It means that there's a lot of other stuff I could be doing rather than registering to vote and voting. I could get a cup of coffee. I could take a nap. The things I don't really have time to do, but I wish I did. So the time spent on other activities while participating in the political process, all of the things I'm giving up in order to participate in the political process. Then there are the information costs. It costs me time and effort to get information about the candidates and about the policies and about all of the voting process itself. There are also some psychological costs, which I know many of us are feeling a lot right now, because this is a long haul from the beginning of October until the November presidential election. So many of us might be feeling stress. We might feel anxiety about the voting process. We might be feeling fear of social judgment. Talking about elections is scary. And I have certainly talked to some students who have expressed just, first time voting. They have never done it before. So the newness and the fact that they've never done it before fills them with a little bit of nervousness about what people will think of them, whether they're going to do the right thing, whether they're going to mess up, all of that. And then finally, access costs. There might be barriers that exist, such as voter ID laws, or if I have some sort of disability or something that is going to make it harder for me to access the ballot, whether that is a physical disability, a cognitive disability, or perhaps not a disability, but just English is my second language, and the ballot is a long ballot. It has a lot of information on it, especially if there are ballot questions on it. And if all of that is presented to me in a language that is more difficult for me to access, then that is an access issue as well. I guess I have one more, social costs, the peer pressure or the social norms that may discourage certain forms of political participation. So if I have friends around me who are like, hey, don't bother, then that is a social cost that I am bearing. So there's a long way to get to that process of finally depositing that ballot for tabulation through the registration, finding it, marking it, and depositing it. And there are a lot of things that can go wrong along the way. So all of these concerns that we've noted present issues for each of the steps along the way that themselves are tricky. So it may be that I've moved, or that there's a duplicate of my voting record, or there's some sort of file errors. It may be that finding my polling location is tricky. How do I find the information about that? How do I even know the word polling location if all of that is new to me? If I encounter a long line there, what do I do? Or if I have a disability, or if I lack the correct documentation, et cetera. So all of these things are areas for error that make the entire process a little bit tricky. And as we've discussed before in this class, we do see that turnout really does vary considerably in the United States by age. I am getting a question from a student.
Can you just give the definition of tabulation?
Yes.
It's a big word that not everyone knows.
Thank you, Nora. So I was just asked, and I'm I keep messing up where I am on the screen. The question was, what is tabulation? And that is a great question. So the tabulation is when I put my ballot through the machine, the machine tabulates and counts my vote and all of the votes on my ballot. So thank you for that. Okay, so I'm just pointing out, and I know my students know this, but this is an important thing to know, that there are really big turnout differences by age in the United States, with those 60 and over voting at the highest rate, and those under 60, but particularly age 18 to 29, voting at the lowest rates. And one of the things that we've talked about in this class, and we will continue to talk about, is that some of that may be interest level of 18 to 29-year-olds, but a lot of it has to do with information and the challenge of learning this whole process, and the challenge of every state in the United States, 50 states, having different rules and regulations, making it a little trickier to access. And if you haven't grown up in a family that was showing you this all the way along, all of these costs are higher for you. All right, so to our topic today, that was all preview to talk about. All right, we are first going to talk about, very briefly, the structural things that we can do, the big policy things that we can do to try to increase voter turnout. And then we're going to talk about the things that we can do more as an individual and what we can do here on campus. So one thing that we could do, we could have a major constitutional overhaul, which, as we know, is a really easy thing to do in the United States. So developing a new electoral system to encourage minor parties, to change first past the post, to do all of these things that would make it just a much different system. Another thing that we could do, which is around election timing, is we could essentially consolidate all elections. So rather than have elections all the time in all of these places everything, just say, nope, there is one election day or 2 election days a year. That's it. For any election in the United States, those are the days we do it, or those are the time periods that we do it. Last major reforms, and many of these have been enacted, is we can allow voters to cast ballots online. That has happened in some municipalities, and it happens in some countries. We could allow ballots to be cast over a 3-week period, which many states already do through early voting. We could enable vote by mail, which some states have entirely vote by mail systems. We could have automatic voter registration, where instead of us actively going to register to vote, we can in fact just be registered to vote and have that happen to us so we can opt out rather than having to opt in. And then what a bunch of other states have is same-day registration, that I can register to vote on the exact same day as the election. So all of those are policy issues to try to make the whole thing increase turnout by making it easier in some sort of way. So today, we're going to talk about the things that each of us can do that is beyond the structure. So imagine you, yes, you are in charge of mobilizing voters. What are the questions that you have if we put you in charge and said, you are the voter mobilization czar of the United States, or of this university campus, or of your city or town? What are the questions that you have? Most likely, as you think through it, you are then going to quickly move to thinking about the things that you think happen usually. That sometimes people, maybe the best thing for me to do is to walk door to door and canvass people and ask them to come out and vote. Or maybe the best thing for me to do is a lit drop and put literature at everybody's doorway. And they will read the literature and they will vote. Or maybe I should mail that because that's a lot easier than doing a lit drop. Or maybe I should just hire a bunch of people to make phone calls and have a commercial phone bank. That sounds really easy, just means I have to raise money, but then I can hire other people to do it. Or maybe I should just send a bunch of people emails, text messages, or maybe I should have a bunch of events, or maybe I should use the mass media, or maybe I should just really refine my messaging techniques, because if I have the right message, that will result in miracles. So, what are your thoughts, students? Briefly, you're not on camera, just to say, what are the techniques that you think might be the most effective if you were in charge of mobilizing? Yes.
Well, I'd say probably the most effective in terms of turnout would be probably events, mass media, like phone banking for elections. For specific candidates, leaflets, like lit drops, door-to-door canvassing are probably the most effective.
Are the most effective.
But in terms of the individual candidates, those don't necessarily work as well with the, are you gonna come out and vote?
Okay, so we have from the floor a student who has pointed to a number of things, I would say, except for email, mass media, effective messaging. Okay, so sorry. To say that those are the things to focus on. I have another student from the floor.
It also depends on what your constituents are, like what area you're in. I worked for camping this summer and we did door-to-door canvassing, but it wasn't possible in some areas of our district because it's very rural. So we sent direct mail to them or we emailed to them instead. So it depends on what area you're in.
So one of the thoughts here is that it's very context specific, that if I'm in a very rural area, very hard to get to places, so that one makes more sense to mail. but other places a bit easier to go door to door. We had a member of Congress on campus last year who said that the most effective way for him to connect with voters was to go to Costco. And that was where he encountered the most. That was Fred Upton from Michigan. Okay, so the questions that voter mobilizers ask are, should we invest in phone banks? Should we hire a telemarketing firm? Should we find people to go to door to door? So where should we send our money? Where should we put our resources? And the answer is, here's what doesn't work. Commercial phone banks have been shown to have pretty much zero impact. Email. I love to email, but email does not work. Facebook reminders, shown to have no impact. Direct mail reminders, no impact. Text messaging reminders, no impact. Voter guides, I love voter guides. Provide lots of information. They do not cause turnout. And that's the thing. What we are saying here is they might educate somebody who is going to turn out, but they are not going to turn a non-voter into a voter. And adding a partisan edge to any of these messages, that doesn't impact it either. So in experiment after experiment after experiment, you can put away the email, stop the text messaging, all of that. For if the goal is turnout, if the goal is to turn somebody from a non-voter into a voter. But what does work, and has been shown to work again and again and again, is canvassing, going door to door, that personal contact. Nonpartisan mailings boost turnout slightly. So what does work, which should come not as a shock, I think, to all of us who are human beings, is that we are social animals, and that the fact that we're social, we are embedded in social circumstances and social worlds, and all of that has an impact on us. That we want to feel wanted, we want to feel part of something, we want to engage in something bigger than ourselves. And so making people feel wanted at the polls is like inviting them to a social occasion. These personal invitations convey the most warmth. And then phone calls. Now, these are not commercial phone banks where scripted. Has anybody here ever done a commercial phone bank, like done the commercial thing? Yeah, okay, so I'm seeing some hands. And you followed the script and had to say exactly what it was, and you were told exactly what to say. Depending on what you were doing it for, again, in all of the studies that have been done, these commercial phone banks have very little impact. But by contrast, if I am calling up my friends and family, or calling up somebody and having essentially a non-scripted conversation with a human about voting, that has been shown to have impact. So relational organizing, which we're going to talk about a little bit more later. Another thing that has seemed to work is recontacting a voter who previously pledged to vote. So that reminder to someone that, hey, out there, I'm recontacting you. I know you pledged to vote. I want to remind you of that. That, just puts it more at top of mind if it wasn't before, and helps them to then follow through on the behavior. There are many non-voters who still think that voting is a civic obligation. And at some level, they might feel a little guilty that they're not voting. So we don't want to engage in guilt. That's not our goal here. But it is that we can urge reminders to follow through on that obligation. That it's great that you feel the civic obligation, and now let's make sure that you follow through on it. And reminding them that voting is a public record. We can look any of you up and see whether you voted or not in any of the elections, see whether you're a super voter or just a presidential election voter, or a midterm and presidential but never local. We can characterize all of you for those voting behaviors. And so the common theme here is that the decision to vote is shaped by our social environments. And all of us have power over our social environments and the ability to transform our social environments. So we all play a key role here. Another finding that is important is that once we help people vote, people who vote will engage in voting again. It's sometimes called the gateway drug, that once you do it once, you're likely to do it. It is habit forming. But it goes both ways. If you vote once, you're more likely to vote again. If you skip it once, you're more likely to skip it again. So we want to focus on the not skipping instead and on the voting. So then another question that you might ask yourselves is, well, when? When is the optimal timing? Should I be doing this 12 months in advance of the election, or like the day before, or when is it the perfect time? And the answer is, we don't know. We don't know when the perfect time is. We do know that, again, we are human beings who procrastinate, put things off, don't pay attention until the end, like wake me up right before the election. So if we are registered to vote and that is all set, then the later the message comes, the more likely we are to follow through, just because of the natural thing about, again, how we behave as people. Then another question is, who should you mobilize? And that just requires a lot of people who can do data mining that we don't have access to. So I'm not going to really talk about that. It's beyond the scope of what most of us can do, but believe me, the campaigns that have the access to the money and the resources are doing data mining. They are trying to figure out these exact kinds of people who have a household size of X and purchase these kinds of products and live in this kind of neighborhood, and they're going after them in particular ways with very strategic messaging. And I wonder if my messaging guru, Dr. Bob, wants to say a couple of words about messaging.
Yeah, this is a good moment. First of all, when you message, you have three different possible goals. One is to energize your base. And so that's where you want to make sure that your messaging is constructed so that there's what they call in the business red meat for the base. The base voters have to turn out. They're more likely to turn out, but those are the ones you go after. The second is to persuade others who are maybe leaning in your direction to go out to vote and or are independent and are making up their minds. So those you're targeting those with a little different messaging. They don't respond as well to the red meat as they do to ads that are somewhat negative in some instances, but also the here's my vision, kind of ad. The third is, believe it or not, one of the reasons why you would advertise is to try to keep some of my opponent's supporters for voting for them. Typically, for example, people who might be marginally leaning in a direction and not too thrilled with your candidate. But so if they're just marginally leaning, you certainly don't want them to fully commit to voting. And so some of the negative advertising is actually designed to say to them, it's not worth voting, right? You don't vote if you're not going to vote for me, you're not going to vote for this person. And so I can give you a lot of negative advertising. And then what happens is the voter just basically says a pox be on both their houses, and they sit home. So that's the goals, the strategies and tactics. One of the ways to increase your base is to have, in a general election, also have a referendum question or two, a referenda, that appeals to the base. So, for example, you will see that happening in this election in some states, the abortion rights being codified into law in the state is on the ballot. either expanding or contracting, depending on, what the goal is and whether the Republicans or Democrats are doing it. But that is going to get people who have an interest in that issue to come and vote. And then the hope is they will continue, because they're there, they're going to vote for your candidate or the candidate that best reflects their particular side in the issue. Clearly, yeah, the issues and um, getting people to be able to do mail-in balloting like we have here in Massachusetts. In Massachusetts, my family is all doing mail-in balloting. We all filled out a request for a ballot form that covered the the primaries and as well as the general election. So we didn't even have to request two different ballots. It's easy as pie. So it gets away from some of the costs that Rachel was talking about. Um, Use of social media can be important, particularly in getting your vote out. But from the viewpoint of the independent voters, it also can be important. And Rachel pointed to the loss of social media, loss of local journalism. Um, that's significant. We have lost about 50% of the newspapers in this country, and many newspapers that are still in existence have gone to 2 days or 3 days a week or even once a week publication. And that's basically because for those of you who are not baby boomers like I am, most people who are not baby boomers don't get their news from traditional media like uh, television and from newspapers. In fact, they get their news from news feeds, which has its own issue. But generally speaking, traditional media forms are very limited. And so taking out an ad in a newspaper, and even out, you'll see a ton of ads on television now, mostly negative. And for those of us living in Massachusetts, we're getting a lot of negative ads from up in the New Hampshire governor's race, for example. But those are aimed at older constituencies generally, and they're if you see an ad on a newscast, it's because you're watching that newscast. According to the Nielsen ratings, there are very few people under the age of 50 that watch newscasts on television, traditional newscasts. So which is why, by the way, when you see the normal advertising, it's all for pills for various things that we people who are more mature have as issues, right? So advertisers know that. The problem here, quite frankly, becomes the misinformation campaigns, right? Because what happens is, in lieu of newspapers, it's websites, it's postings on TikTok and YouTube to try to get to our college student generation and those a bit younger. And it's hard to separate the wheat from the chaff at that point in time. So there tends to be a lot of disinformation in the out there. In the Obama campaign, they actually had a whole group, both for his first election and his reelection, that was dedicated to nothing else but to keep observing the internet and seeing what was out there on him, and to make sure that they corrected anything that was negative. And literally, they had a whole army of people doing that, just to make sure to tamp down the rumors, et cetera, and the negative stuff. So what has happened is the ease of communication with the internet is, again, that two-edged sword, as we all know. It makes it easier for you to directly relate and get in to the people you know who support you, and even to recruit some others. But it makes it much more difficult. Think of it this way: worldwide figures. YouTube is the number one viewed website in the United States, uh, followed closely by Facebook. And they're just flipped worldwide. Worldwide, it's Facebook and YouTube. Facebook worldwide um, has 1/3 of the population in the world goes on Facebook at least once a month. 1/3 of the world's, it has billions of views. In the United States, 80% of people go on YouTube, 80% of web users go on YouTube at least once a month. So it's where people is. It has become the new public square. And so you have to be out there optimizing your messages at that point in time. And where you're really looking for there is go back to that. I don't want you to go back to it, Rachel, but if you remember that chart that Rachel showed you about who participates. Oh, thank you, Rachel. There, perfect. On social media, most of my generation is on Facebook, which is one of the reasons why younger generations have been going away from it, because their parents and grandparents are on it, because we want to see the grandkids and all that kind of stuff. And so it's become an older form of media. But Instagram and TikTok is the largest growing media in the world and the largest growing media in the United States by leaps and bounds. So if I want to convince those 18 to 29-year-olds who in the last presidential election showed up at about 50%, but if you look at it at about 25% in the midterm elections, and I want to get into that, I want to mine that, then what I need to do is I need to be where they are. Obama did that, which one of the reasons why his campaign is the first campaign that really had a social media focus. And the result was you had significant increases, particularly in younger people who voted. Historically, younger people have always voted, as you can see from the chart, younger people have always voted at a lower range for a variety of reasons than people who are older. If you want to change that, you've got to go where they live and where younger people live. I give a survey to my students every semester so I get 80 to 85 responses every semester. How much time do you spend on the internet? They have to figure it out. They keep track of their internet use for 4 days. The average student spends between 8 to 10 hours a day on social media and other forms of media, right? Now, some of that's duplicated because they multitask, right? I'm watching The Bachelorette and I'm texting my friend at the same time about it. But what happens is you need to be there in order to be able to really communicate with them, and you probably see an increase. And by the way, you're seeing that happen in the Democratic convention. Influencers, for the first time, had their own space in the convention hall, and they invited the 220 social media influencers who were particularly popular with 25 and under to the convention, and they had, like I said, their own space to do their webcasts from, podcasts, etc. So it's really become significant in terms of it. So in terms of where you wanted to be to mobilize, I think you're seeing much more emphasis being placed on various forms of social media, which has become, quite frankly, the new town hall. Rachel, back to you.
Thank you. Well, now I'm just trying to see if my chart will work. Let's see, there we go. Okay, so what we did was talk about the when and the who, and then talked about, thank you, from our message person, about the kinds of messages that we might want to send out if we were doing ads, and the kinds of things that we might want to do if we're engaged in social media. And I think, even though we haven't really seen causation of social media causing voting, I do think, this is one of those, I think it's impossible to study this, but if you didn't have a social media presence, that would probably be harmful. But we can't exactly say that the social media caused someone to vote. But going back to as we think about the power that each of us have, there's this thing that is, that has has two words, relational organizing, but it is exactly what, it's not new, but we're thinking about and noticing the impact that it can have. And that is based on the idea that people are more likely to act when asked by someone they know and trust. And that is even more true today because of the misinformation, our bubbles that we're in, the feeds that we're following, that at the end of the day, we're just more likely to say, okay, like somebody needs to sort through all of this noise for me and help me understand it. And that is going to help me make decisions and take action in a way that I wouldn't have been able to do without those people. So long ago, when I was writing my dissertation, I went and interviewed former governor of Massachusetts, Mike Dukakis, who is just so well known for his focus on relational organizing, and this goes back to the 80s and the 70s before that, and his idea that on every single street there should be a captain, somebody who is in charge of getting all of the people on that street to vote. And if you just have one person on every street in charge of every street, you're going to see a lot of turnout. Actually, I think that's pretty true. That's not such a bad idea. This goes way back before that. But the idea is that in studies where we put people in charge of their friends and family, we see big increases in turnout. That if you are told, okay, I want you to make 10 people vote, you're more likely to get that done than if you were just told to be a person in the world. So in one study, turnout increased when people were encouraged to contact their target list however they wanted, whether they wanted to call them, text them, meet with them for coffee, send them a piece of mail, whatever it was, that personal outreach, it increased turnout by 13.2%. Friends are credible. But the thing is, if you can't pay people to do this, you can't hire this out. Because if you hire friends, it doesn't really work. It is the friendship that makes the difference, and people who are highly motivated that makes the difference. But if you have volunteers who are just trying to get some money, it does not work. So you have to have people who really care and are really concerned, and finding those people can take some work.
Excuse me, Rachel. I think we lost your mic.
All right. The battery ran out. Hold on one second. Can you hear that now?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you. So here are some ideas for what you can do. First of all, thinking about your social network and who your friends and family are, and who even beyond that. So it may not be a personal, a close personal friend, but are there people in your circle who you may not know very well, but know enough to be able to say, hey, I don't know you very well, but I would love to talk with you about voting and whether you plan to vote. Just that conversation, it's a great way to have a conversation starter in October of 2024. And preface it by saying, I'm telling you that I am nonpartisan in this conversation. So if you also ask people to do some things for you, like, okay, I want to make sure, I'm so excited that you plan to vote. Will you send me a selfie when you're at the polling location, or when you go to early vote, or when you do your vote by mail? I am not saying I want to see your ballot. I'm not saying I want to do any of that stuff, but I want to participate that. And maybe a WhatsApp group or a social group that you're part of can encourage that. And then another thing that all of us can do, some is a little easier than others, homegrown how-to videos, sorry about the challenge there, that go viral at the behest of social media celebrities. So do you know some celebrities or some local internal celebrities among your friends group? that where you have some how-to videos or things like that. These are all different ideas, and probably you can come up with better ones than I can. But these are the kinds of things that where your creativity and just knowledge of your friends can make a huge difference to what happens. Now, I know that I'm speaking to the library audience and that I'm also speaking, and I know that there are, I just have a lot of people in my life who talk about postcards and sending postcards and asking whether postcards make a difference. And so they make a slight difference. It's not nothing, it's not huge, but it is worth, I suppose, worth your time. You will see in just a minute. Philadelphia partnered with some researchers to test the effects of postcards, encouraging turnout in both the May primary and the November general. And turnout did increase by 0.8% among those who received a postcard. But what is interesting is that it was 1.5% increase in the general who were encouraged to vote earlier in the primary. And that sort of speaks to the, if I vote once, I'll vote again kind of idea, and that it is habit forming. So early engagement gets us to later engagement. So if you write postcards, you're going to get one vote out of the 71 that you write. So it's your choice about whether you want to do that. But that's something. That is something. But one thing to note is that the effect of the first postcard is greater than the effect of the second. So if you think, oh, I'll write this postcard 5 times, it's the first contact that makes the difference. So better to spread it out and write 71 times 5 to all of those different people than to just focus on the 71 people that you wrote to. Okay, so what works on messaging if you are writing these postcards? But this transcends to other modalities as well. First of all, just encouraging early voting. And why? Because why? Why encourage early voting? Question is from the audience. Here we go.
It's so much easier. There's no line. You're just in, you're out.
Okay, so early voting can be easier for some. You're in, you're out. Usually it's convenient, but if it's not, then, there's usually no line. It's very fast. It's during the weekday. You choose when you're going to go during the hours. And then the other thing is check it off your list. You're done. You voted. Happened. Great. Another effective technique is to ask them, when do you plan to vote? How do you plan to vote? Just that mental, okay, I'm going to follow through. Then another thing is, thank you for voting. I would like you to encourage your family and friends. So sort of the Tupperware party model of we're going to encourage people here to then go to the next one and the next one. Another one, again, reminding them that it's public record, that their vote is public record, and thanking the recipient for registering or voting in the past, and then making sure that that's true. But I think that feeling of gratitude, or that expression of gratitude, rather, has an impact as well. Again, let's go back to the original thought that we had when we talked about social, that inviting people and being warm and nice about it has downstream consequences. But interestingly, if you are a person in Massachusetts who thinks that you're going to send a lot of postcards to swing state voters, somehow people do pick up on that postmark, and they see if it was postmarked in the state or not in the state. So I just leave it at that. Food for thought. And that is the end of our presentation portion of this. I'll go back to the beginning slide, or actually I'll just end the slide. And now we're going to go to the question part of our time today.
Rachel, can I make one point just before we do that?
Multiple points.
Remember that, and we've discussed this too, as being a big issue. I want the audience to remember that part of what happens with our current politicized polarized climate, is that the parties, while trying to increase participation for supporters for their candidates, are simultaneously trying to decrease participation on the other side. So if you're really interested in democracy and just getting people out to vote in general without being choosing a side in the particular thing, some of the forces that are working there are, as Rachel mentioned, the parties have access to a lot more money, a lot more research, et cetera. So they're a lot more focused in this process and doing it. And in some ways, and I speak as a Democrat in this instance, but in some ways, our parties are doing voters a disservice by all being advocates rather than just generally advocating to get out the vote. But because it's actually those who are advocating, like people like Rachel, has made this her life's work, and she's really tremendous at it. But unfortunately, she doesn't have the kind of resources available to her that the Republicans and the Democrats do. So it's sort of it's almost like shoveling sand against the tide.
This is not a request for money on my part, I'll just assure you. So I wonder if any of our students would like to come forward and stand here and ask a question. And they will be up in a moment. So Mina, if you have questions from the audience, we can take those as they ponder their questions.
I don't have any questions from the audience yet, but I do have a question about that. How can people? We talked about this a lot, Rachel, about grassroots organizing. How do different age groups pull that together, given sometimes the lack of resources?
There are probably, and I'm sure there are, people who know a lot more about the variations across age groups with respect to grassroots organizing than I, because my initial thought is I don't think there's very much difference across age. Despite what Bob rightly said, there are different habits that all of these age groups have. And that is true, absolutely, about how they get information and where they get their information and all of that. But when it comes to grassroots organizing, I think the only difference between age groups is really about location and where they are. In some ways, college students, it's a very easy group to contact because we have you here in a classroom, we have you on campus, we are connected with you, and we reliably can find you at different locations. In a way that is harder with community members, just because of the random group that you get at a playground or whatever the community center is. It's just a little bit less reliable in that sense. But grassroots organizing is relational organizing, and it is it just goes back again and again and again to this direct human contact that is so powerful for taking action. And it is precisely what social movements use as their primary mechanism. That the reason that we call them social movements is because they are social, and they also have these the people who participate in social movements have this other experience, which is not just that they believe in the cause and the kinds of things that they want to accomplish through the movement, but they're also finding friendship and solidarity and connection and lifelong relationships that are critical to their own development as humans along the way. So that is exactly what engagement in the political process requires and is needed from all areas.
Yeah, to Rachel's point, all of the theories of mass media say that the same thing, that individuals, people are more influential on other people than the media is. So, for example, viewing an ad or viewing a debate, etc., you're much more likely to be influenced by the person that you talk to about that than you are. So this relational is very important. One thing that I think we begin to also see is that the research on social media suggests that people oftentimes use social media and don't think of it in mass media terms. So they're using social media. It's like making a phone call, right? When you make a phone call, you don't think of you're using media, but you're having a conversation with a friend over a long distance. That's how social media is. And so when you do a when you go on some of the online and you do a face-to-face meeting, etc., that's like this kind of situation here. And so it's almost like being there, and some of the barriers to communication that you see in traditional media are not there. My point is that it's social media can be used to not only like influencers influencing people on makeup choices. Influencers can also be used to get people to get out to vote. It can be a tool in that interpersonal communication.
I see Rachel's passing notes, so I'm gonna just
I have a student who does have a question, but needs another student to ask that question.
Gotcha. Okay.
So let's see. Would Alessandra be willing to ask the question that is? So hold on. We have a question, and we have a student who's coming up on behalf of another student.
So we're all poll workers, how does being a poll worker has impact future voter turnout?
And you are going to introduce yourself.
Okay, hi, I'm Alessandra. I'm a student in this class. And the question is, for this class, we're all signed up to be poll workers. How will that affect our future political engagement?
So that's a great question. And it is something that we actually don't know the answer to. And it is exactly the kind of research that I want to do. Because I have heard, and a lot of us who think about poll workers a lot, have gotten some anecdotal evidence from students who say, I plan to be a poll worker again. And pretty much if you're planning to be a poll worker, you're planning to be a voter. But we don't know how much repeat times a student who works as a poll worker at college then goes on to do it again and again and again. So this is a question that needs to be researched. I do hypothesize that people who engage in service, especially early on, that causes them to engage in service again, and that having young people engage in service has downstream consequences of more service. And we do know from other forms of service that this is true. So people who serve in the Peace Corps, people who serve in the military, people who serve in Vista, all of these experiences, or they do city year or et cetera, those are meaningful experiences that then cause future service, but we don't know about that when it comes to poll workers. So it's a great research question that I am planning on doing something with. Okay, I have another student who's coming up.
Hi, I'm Bryn Buckley. I'm also a sophomore in this class. Dr. Rosenthal talked a little bit about influencers and how they can help mobilize the vote, but I'm just wondering, does anyone know like how much that actually, like influencers can post all day, but is that actually like mobilizing young voters to show up to the polls?
If I might, when Taylor Swift, who's the most powerful personage, influencer, whatever, online, when she decided to endorse Harris, over 350,000 people went to the a link on her website and clicked on for voter and for registration information. I would suggest that that's a huge example of the power of, particularly in her case, her tremendous celebrity, but the potential power of influencers on the internet.
I I think that there are the mega celebrities of the Taylor Swift type. I am not sure about other kinds of celebrities and influencers, whether that, I just don't know. We do know that celebrity endorsements for a long time made very little difference in elections. And I'll tell you the difference between, let's say, a union endorsing a candidate versus a celebrity endorsing a candidate. A celebrity endorses a candidate and you get the name, and that's cool. You can say, I was endorsed by whoever it was, this amazing singer, amazing athlete. And maybe I get a lot of money out of that, maybe I don't. If I have a union or an interest group that I believe in, not endorse me, I get people. I get boots on the ground. I get people coming and holding signs for me. I get money. I get them talking to their friends. I get just so much extra from that. I do think, I mean, clearly Taylor Swift, like, she can tell you to do something, and there are a lot of people who are going to do it. But I'm not sure who else commands that power of celebrity and how many people do, or if they're just a handful of them. All right, we have another student. Come on down.
I just had a comment.
It's okay. Yeah. Turn your comment into a question, Nora.
Oh,
Hi, I'm Nora. I'm a student of the class. So we're talking about how influencers may or may not affect registration and voter mobilization. Something we've talked about in the PR department, especially a lot, I know Dr. Bob has talked about it, is influencers are very specific. They're very niche to their audiences. So when someone like Taylor Swift talks about the election, you're like, what kind of knowledge does Taylor Swift have about the political process rather than a union when they are involved directly in that, like getting funding from the government, stuff like that. But when you have people like Alex Earl saying, oh, go vote, what does Alex Earl have to do with the election? So I think it's very specific on who is endorsing and how.
Has that kind of power in a way that
I think she
celebrities don't.
I think she has the power to get people to register. I just don't think she has the power to get people out to vote in huge numbers. I think we had an increase in registration, but I don't know if that'll turn afterwards into actual voting. I don't know the numbers on that because in the past she has also registered, like had crazy registration numbers every time she posts about it. I did like a little bit of research after we talked about it last week, and the registration numbers always spike, but the voting numbers don't always correlate to that.
It's hard to know.
Exactly.
But I've just, if Taylor Swift and you're out there watching the Ashland Library presentation, maybe we can think about how that translates.
I will say this about influencers. If because influencers have the interesting thing is a lot of advertisers, for example, now in cosmetics, for example, there have been whole campaigns which go with what we call micro influencers, those that have under 20,000 people. And they have found that they get a bigger bang for their buck because they're actually, most people who see them, who view these influencers, don't see them as being advertisers. They see them as being just a genuine person who tries the makeup and likes it or doesn't like it. And I don't think yet we in politics have really done this, right? We haven't used that channel. I think it's coming, and I think eventually people will start being political influencers. I mean, you get some of that with the talk show hosts and the talking heads and stuff. But I think those micro influencers might be a wave of the future moving forward on this. That might not be a good thing, but I think like anything else, if you can sell soap on advertising, you can sell a candidate on advertising, you can do it with an influencer.
It's a fascinating question, especially in local politics and knowing who the local influencers are, because they are out there, but it's who are they, and are they talking about the local issues, or do they just happen to have a local audience?
Yep.
So that's the other tricky thing. But there's, I do agree, a lot more research to be done on the impact of social media, because at the end of the day, social media is still only really, I mean, a decade old in
Right.
its in the kind of, I mean, it's older than that, but the kinds of things that we're seeing are really not that old, and so still refining what impact that has on our digital natives, our students.
Rachel, can I ask a follow-up question? A little bit on a follow-up from what Nora just said about the disconnect between registration from like something like Taylor Swift and going to actual voting, but also that slide that you had that showed that students are the least number of people that are voting. So what, and you said that they're the easiest to find because they're on campuses or, things like that. So where's that disconnect? Like, given that we can easily talk to students and young people, but yet they're the lowest number to vote.
Well, a couple of caveats to that. Of course, there are a lot of 18 to 24-year-olds who are not students. So that's one piece of it. They're only, I don't know exactly what percentage of 18 to 24-year-olds are in college campus right now, but it's under half.
The number's going down.
The number is going down. Thank you.
Wow.
Better than I do. So first of all, that means that we only have a little of a captured audience on these college campuses. And youth voting in general is actually ticking up. So that's a good sign. But going up and down according to the election. So that gets us to just the challenge of getting our young people to participate in politics. And so much of that goes back to the kinds of costs that we have, and our young people pay more, essentially, on all of those costs, because it is new to them, because there's sort of like the startup costs are always greater than the maintenance costs. So getting all of that stuff ready, the registration, the this, the that. The other thing about our young people is that they're mobile, they're moving around, and they're moving from state to state, from address to address, and that makes it harder because they have to re-register. They have to learn the new rules of the new state. And voting, et cetera, is usually at the bottom of their list, not because they don't care, but because they got a lot of other things that they have to accomplish in their lives, and they're busy, and they're not exactly frequenting government offices a lot. And although this is not true across the country, in some urban areas, young people are deciding not to get their driver's licenses. And so they're not even going to the registry of motor vehicles, et cetera. So there are a lot of things that the way that we have designed our policies, we are not inviting our young people into the process, and we're making it harder for them.
Rachel, I was part of the vanguard. I was in college, and we worked for the 18-year-old vote. I was 21 when it turned 18, and what drove us was the Vietnam War, because we all had skin in the game and we wanted to end the war. And so it was a huge issue, and that's what helped mobilize people with the anti-war movement, et cetera. I think when you'll see something like that, and so we should see a little bit more of an uptick with the abortion issue, because even in states where it's not on the ballot as a referendum item, I think a lot of women and some men certainly see that as being on the ballot with the Harris and Trump candidacies. So I think that's one of the things that might drive up, particularly since it's an important issue for younger women and men.
And
For that matter.
yes, and it is an issue that that age group rates as very high on
Yes.
their issue list, along with the economy.
Yeah.
So a lot of, but yes, they are seeing that as a reason to vote in a way that previous generations have not. I see that our class time is coming to an end, so I want to thank everybody for being with us today and thank our students for continuing to be wonderful.
Yes, and I really appreciate both of you and all of your students allowing us a sneak peek into your classroom and having a little bit of a a walk down memory lane of how that feels, but also just how important it is for us to have these conversations across age groups and understanding each other's perspectives. So for Dr. Bob and Cobb, I really appreciate this. And for all the students who had the courage to stand up and ask your questions and think with us, I really appreciate it. So I'm going to end the Zoom, but I do appreciate all of this, and I hope that you all vote in November and feel strong about it.
Thank you, Mina, for spreading the word.
Thank you very much. All right. Thank
Okay,
you.
bye, everybody.
Bye.